Jaya Nitilera Pravishtam Vishnu Pada Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Shotra Shishimar Ambaya Charanavinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jaya Nitilera Pravishtam Vishnu Pada Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Shotra Shishimar Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavarinda Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद शेरवैत गदाधर शिवासारि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री श्री राधे कृष्ण गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधे कुंड की गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की जय नवद्वीप धाम की यमुना माई की गंगा माई की भक्ति देवी की तुलसी महारानी की सामवेद भक्त वृंद की नित्य गो प्रेम नंदी. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. From Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 14, Verse 17, line by line. Rajana Sadva Matyebhyas Kora Debya Prajanipra Rakshanyata Balim Granan Iha pretya chamodate Rajana sadva matyebhyas Choradebhya prajanipra Rakshanyata balim granan Iha pretya chamodate Rajana sadva matyebhyas Choradebhya prajanipra Rakshanyata balim granan Iha pretya chamodate. Rajana sarva mityebhyas Koradebhya prajanipra Rakshanyata balim granan Iha pretya chamodate. Rajana sarva mityebhyas Yakshayata balim granan Yachamodate Adyanatava Matyebhyas Korate Prachajanipra Rakshayata balim granan Iha precha chamodate. Ajana sarva matyebhyas Koradebhya prajanipra Yakshanyata balim granan Iha precha chamodate. Rajana sarvamapeyas Chora nipra prajanipra Rakshanyata balim gurenan Iha precha chamodate Rajana sarvamapyevyas Choratipya prajanipra Rakshanyata balingrenam To word by word, Rajan, O king, a sadhu, mischievous, amatyebhya, from ministers, chora adibhya, from thieves and rogues, praja, the citizens, nipra, the king, rakshan, protecting, yata, accordingly as, balim, taxes, guranan, accepting, iha, in this world, pretya, after death, cha, also, modite, enjoys. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Translation. The saintly person continued, when the king protects the citizens from the disturbances of mischievous ministers, as well as from thieves and rogues, he can, by virtue of such pious activities, accept taxes given by his subjects. Thus, a pious king can certainly enjoy himself in this world as well as in the life after death. Purport. The duty of a pious king is described very nicely in this verse. His first and foremost duty is to give protection to the citizens from thieves and rogues, as well as from ministers who are no better than thieves and rogues. Formerly, ministers were appointed by the king and were not elected. Consequently, if the king was not very pious or strict, the ministers would become thieves and rogues and exploit the innocent citizens. It is the king's duty to see that there is no increase of thieves and rogues, either in the government secretariat or in the Department of Public Affairs. If a king cannot give protection to citizens from thieves and rogues, both in government service and public affairs, he has no right to exact taxes from them. In other words, the king or the government that taxes can levy taxes from the citizens only if the king or government is able to give protection to the citizens from thieves and rogues. In the 12th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam 12.140, there is a description of these thieves and rogues in government services. As stated, prajaste bakshiyasyanti milicha rajanaya rupinaha. These proud militias, persons who are less than Sudras, representing themselves as kings, will tyrannize their subjects, and their subjects, on the other hand, will cultivate the most vicious practices. Thus, practicing all evil habits and behaving foolishly, the subjects will be like their rulers. The idea is that in the democratic days of Kali Yuga, the general population will fall down to the standard of Sudras, as stated, Kalo Sudra Sambhavaha. Practically the whole population of the world will be a Sudra. A Sudra is a fourth-class man who is only fit to work for the three higher social castes. Being fourth-class men, Sudras are not very intelligent. Since the population is fallen in these democratic days, they can only elect a person in their category. But a government cannot run very well when it is run by Sudras. The second class of men, known as Kshatriyas, are especially meant for governing a country under the direction of saintly persons, Brahmanas, who are supposed to be very intelligent. In other ages, in Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Dwapara Yuga, the general populace was not so degraded, and the head of government was never elected. The king was the supreme and executive personality, and if he ever caught ministers stealing like thieves and rogues, he would at once have them killed or dismissed from service. As it was the duty of the king to kill thieves and rogues, it was similarly the duty of the king to immediately kill dishonest ministers in government service. By such strict vigilance, the king could run the government very well, and the citizens would be happy to have such a king. The conclusion is that unless the king is able to perfectly give protection to the citizens from rogues and thieves, he has no right to levy taxes from the citizens for his own sense gratification. However, if he gives all protection to the citizens and levies taxes on them, he can live very happily and peacefully in this life, and at the end of life will be elevated to the heavenly kingdom or even to the Vaikunthas, where he will be happy in all respects. Om Gyanantimidandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumritam Nena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtabitam Yena Bhutale Sayamrapa Karamayam Tadati Svapandantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutupara Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatha Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishan Kanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Rate Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Namne Guresvise Namaha Vanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. It's a privilege to be here with you all who inspire me so much. So the previous chapters in Srimad Bhagavatam have taught us about the various saintly kings and their pastimes and the way in which they have contributed to the welfare of the world. In 2 chapters ago we've been hearing the end of the pastimes and the glories of Dhruva Maharaj, whose steadfast devotion to the Lord earned him an eternal position in the spiritual sky. Dhruva Maharaj's son Utkala displayed complete renunciation, being fully satisfied and detached from worldly power, so much so that he had no desire to inherit the throne of his father. And so following Dhruva Maharaj came a succession of kings and rulers, leading to the gentle and saintly king Anga, who is described in the previous verse, who embraced Brahminical culture and lovingly protected his citizens. And in contrast to these saintly kings of which we have been learning, this chapter introduces King Anga's son Vena, whose reign was marked by irreligion and by chaos, and that this transition from saintly leadership to corrupt governance highlights the consequences of a leader's character on society. King Vena will discuss his pastimes briefly, for the circumstances of his birth were quite unique and also reveal an important spiritual truth. King Anga and his wife Sunita were initially unable to have a child. But King Anga was very driven by the desire to have a son, and so he performed a great sacrifice in order for his son to be born. But this sacrifice, this yagya, was mysteriously unsuccessful, in that the demigods did not appear in order to accept the sacrifice. And this was very distressing to King Anga, and he inquired to the priests who performed the yagya, because he was concerned that he had offended the demigods in some way. And the priests were able to assure him that in this life he had committed no sinful activities, but that this reaction was a reflection of past lives and the sinful reactions incurred then. But they recommended that he instead direct his prayer towards Vishnu, towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the ultimate benefactor of all sacrifices. And so he did so, and the sacrifice performed for Lord Vishnu yielded these sacred remnants, prasadam, which when given to Sunita, his wife, she was able to conceive a child and have a son. And so from this we can learn that all sacrifices and religious activities should be performed for the pleasure of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the ultimate controller of all results. And just as King Anga's sacrifice only succeeded when the sacrifice was directed towards Lord Vishnu, all of our actions also find their fulfillment when they are directed and performed as an offering to Krishna. But then we see that from an early age, Vena demonstrated terrible cruelty, seeming to take pleasure in the slaughtering of innocent animals and even killing his own friends. And this was despite King Anga's effort to guide him and to punish him, but Vena remained, unrepentant, and his nature endured. And this, of course, caused King Anga great distress. And it seems surprising that such a noble king as King Anga would have a son like Vena, whose nature was so cruel. But the Bhagavatam explains that this arrangement allowed King Anga to lose his attachment not only to his son but to his kingdom in its entirety. And he sort of recognized the futility of material attachments and relationships. And so King Anga renounced his royal duties in order to retire to the forest to meditate and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so the citizens were, once they realized that King Anga had disappeared, they were very distressed by the absence of their noble king. And reluctantly they installed Vena as the new ruler. And Vena's cruelty was such that it kept at bay the thieves and the rogues of the land, because they were in fear of this very cruel king, which was positive for the citizens that the thieves and rogues were kept at bay. But at the same time, King Vena's pride was ever growing, and his misuse of power was just creating chaos. He insulted many great personalities, and he began to restrict different forms of religious practice. And so this created a difficult dilemma, for without a ruler, society would become unregulated, and the thieves would exploit the people. But yet, with a king as irreligious as King Vena, the citizens would suffer his oppressive rule. And so the Bhagavatam describes this predicament as akin to ants being trapped in the middle of a burning log, where there is danger, impending danger on each side. And so, recognizing their responsibility to protect the kingdom, the great sages convened in order to find a solution to this predicament. And so they approached King Vena and were appealing to his ego by explaining all of the materialistic benefits of becoming a righteous ruler. But despite their very sound advice, Vena was very much blinded by pride and refused to reform. And so shortly after, the sages concluded that they were unable to change his heart and to turn him to a more righteous ruler, and so they ended his rule by taking his life. And so the pastimes of King Vena serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of irreligion and the misuse of power and neglecting spiritual principles. And King Vena possessed much strength and intelligence, but these qualities were overshadowed by his arrogance and his cruelty, and his disregard for religious principles. And so the verse that we're exploring today takes place in the middle of the sage's instruction of King Vena. We see that this Srimad Bhagavatam, it imparts eternal lessons through the retelling of historic events, offering us lessons which are applicable for all times and all places. And in this verse, Srila Prabhupada explains in his purport that it is the sacred responsibility of leaders to protect their citizens from thieves and rogues, while at the same time guiding them towards God consciousness. The king, it is also described that the king must ensure that his own administration is thoroughly honest and guard very vigilantly against any corruption from within the government. And all of these responsibilities of the king exists for the benefit of the citizens. We see that leadership is not simply a position of authority, but a sacred duty to serve and uplift others. And we see that when we consider the divine leadership of our Srila Prabhupada, who took on an immense responsibility for his disciples all over the world, guiding them not only in their spiritual life, but also assisting them in practical matters. And his leadership was rooted in compassion and humility and dedication to Krishna. And we see that the absence of God-centered leadership today has led to societal issues like corruption and inequality and general moral decline. And this highlights the need for leaders to prioritize spiritual values. And Srila Prabhupada also explains that a king who protects and guides his citizens according to Dharma is performing pious activities and accrues spiritual benefit. But conversely, a leader who neglects their duties or misguides their followers incurs sinful reactions in this life and in the next. And this principle is interesting and significant because leadership amplifies the karmic results of one's actions. So a leader actually reaps the results of the pious activities of the people they guide, but conversely may also share in their sinful reactions if he leads them astray. So thus leadership is an opportunity for immense spiritual benefit, or very severe consequences depending on the quality of one's service. So that the point is that leadership amplifies both positive and negative karmic consequences. If we think of a king like Parikshit Maharaj, who guided his citizens towards Krishna consciousness, accrued immense spiritual benefit. And conversely, King Vena's misuse of power led to his downfall and great suffering. And Srila Prabhupada explains that this principle applies not only to kings, but to anyone in any position of authority, no matter how small. Think of a teacher or a parent or an employer bears the responsibility for those under their care. And so this principle reminds us to approach positions of authority with humility and responsibility and a deep sense of service to others. And we see that just leadership in Vedic culture was a sacred duty, and the king was considered the representative of God and a servant of the people, tasked with establishing Dharma and ensuring the well-being of his subjects. We hear in Bhagavad Gita 3:21, Yad yadacharati shretas tatareva toro janaha sayat pramanam kurute lokashtadanuvatate. Whatever action a great man performs, common men follow, and whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. And so this reminds us that whatever action leaders perform, others will follow. And so there is immense influence of leaders that they have on society in terms of both the moral and spiritual direction of society. And that we need not be a ruler of a kingdom for this to apply to our own lives. Within our homes or our workplaces or our communities, we are given leadership opportunities which we must approach very sincerely with all the qualities that we've been discussing. So we can reflect perhaps on how it is that we can embody these qualities when we're given opportunities of leadership. There's an interesting discussion in the purport of this verse about taxation and the Vedic, in terms of Vedic governance, the concept of taxation differs slightly from our modern understanding. And the essence of that is that the taxes that are paid by the people are not unconditional, but they are dependent on the king's ability to provide protection and to guide his people toward God consciousness. And so this creates a fair exchange where the people willingly offer a portion of their income, which I believe is 25% in Vedic times, in return for the king's care and governance. And there's this harmony that exists, and we hear that Maharaj Yudhishthir's reign was so exemplary that even nature cooperated, and the crops grew abundantly and rivers flowed smoothly, and the citizens were peaceful and satisfied. And this mutual harmony highlights the benefits of a God-conscious leadership, where the king is stepping fully into the responsibility of guiding his people and protecting his people. And we know that no such a law exists in modern society, and that modern systems impose compulsory tax irrespective of the government's abilities to uphold security or moral values. And this disparity that we can observe highlights the deviation of modern leadership from the Vedic ideal. The modern concept of leadership is often emphasizing power and personal achievement, whereas Vedic leadership is about selfless service. And another lesson that we can draw from the life of King Vena, and from this portion of the chapter specifically, is the importance of listening to others and receiving advice. When the great sages approached King Vena to guide him back to the path of righteousness, they spoke with wisdom and with humility and with a genuine desire to benefit him and the citizens of the kingdom. However, King Vena was so much blinded by his pride and arrogance that he dismissed their instructions, and it was his inability to listen attentively and apply their guidance that led to his downfall very directly. And we know that attentive listening to the Lord's name, form, and qualities and pastimes is the first branch of devotional service, Shravanam. And the willingness to listen to wise counsel is a hallmark of good leadership and personal growth. In contrast, having a strong pride and an unwillingness to hear others will only hinder our progress and allow undesirable patterns of thought and speech and action to remain unchecked. And we hear all throughout our the first quality of a good listener is humility. That's very foundational to listening attentively and receptively. And we hear throughout the Bhagavatam and throughout our Sampradaya the importance of humility emphasized. Srila Prabhupada would often say that without humility we cannot make progress in our spiritual lives. And Lord Chaitanya has said that it is only in a humble state of mind that we should approach the holy name of the Lord. And in the Bhagavad Gita we see Arjuna humbly approaching Krishna for guidance and receiving good instruction. Even Maharaj Parikshit, who even after he was cursed to die, he spent the last days of his life attentively listening to Shukdev Goswami narrate the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Maharaj Parikshit's attentive, focused listening during that period transformed his death into the pinnacle of his spiritual life. And so the guidance of the Guru, of scriptures, of saintly persons is so valuable. And when we hear from such sources, we're hearing the distilled wisdom passed down for thousands of years. And so we see that King Vena's rejection of the sage's advice represents a rejection of the whole Vedic system. And it's that pride that prevents us from acknowledging that others may have more wisdom or experience that we can learn from. But King Vena's refusal to heed the sage's advice just highlights how arrogance can really isolate us and lead us to self-destruction. And we can frame listening also as an act of service, as a way to express gratitude and respect toward the speaker. And whether we're hearing from spiritual authorities or from peers or even from juniors, we should remember that Krishna often speaks to us through others. And Srila Prabhupada would just always emphasize that sincerely and attentively listening from bona fide sources will clarify our understanding and ultimately purify our hearts. And so the life and reign of King Vena can serve as a powerful reminder of the very profound impact that leadership has on society. And through his example, Srimad Bhagavatam teaches us the dangers of irreligion and of arrogance and of a disregard for spiritual principles. And King Vena's inability to listen to the sages reflects the importance of humility and receptivity in leadership and in our personal growth. And so we were contrasting King Vena's rule with saintly rulers like Maharaj Yudhishthira and Maharaj Parikshit, just in order to underscore the transformative power of God-centered leadership. And when leaders prioritize their dharma and protect their people and guide them toward Krishna consciousness, society flourishes in harmony. But however, when leaders neglect these responsibilities, chaos and suffering prevail. And all of these lessons extend to our own lives. That leadership is not confined to kings or political rulers, but in every role we play, whether as parents or teachers or employers or community members, we have the opportunity to lead with humility, integrity and a devotion to Krishna. And ultimately, the Srimad Bhagavatam is just reminding us that the highest purpose of leadership and the highest purpose of all of our actions is love and service and glorification to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And by aligning our actions with this principle, not only do we uplift those around us, but it also allows us to progress in our own spiritual journey. There's a little bit of time remaining if there are any corrections or questions or comments. I'd love to hear from any of you. Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
So you outlined how in Vedic times how ideal rule was and how nowadays it's more like, like Prabhupada explains in the book that Kali Yuga everyone is basically Shudra, but
Yeah.
Shudra is only select Shudra.
Yeah.
So then when people hear like that, then they would say like, okay, so what's the solution? Like, it's hard to imagine, okay, someday there was a beard, there was a king again.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. We certainly seems as if, or feels as if we're a long way from God-conscious leadership when we observe the leaders we have today. But I suppose leadership begins, at the ground level, and having communities with conscious leadership is sort of planting the seeds, perhaps, for that leadership to take place at a more institutional or national level. So I think just becoming and nurturing conscious leadership in the communities of which we are a part is hopefully moving us in a direction that will one day see conscious leadership at a higher level. But it's a good question, and I'm not so sure aside from that. Hare Krishna. Prabhu. Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, it's a lovely question, and I think it speaks to the difference between modern leadership and the ideal of Vedic leadership that's been described to us in Bhagavatam, and that modern leadership is so wrapped up with pridefulness and arrogance and desire for power and recognition. But though that leadership did not have that connotation when we speak of these kings, and it was so much about uh, you being of service to those under your leadership, and maybe framing your leadership as a service, perhaps, and then approaching that service with humility. It's a means by which to balance those two, or just recognizing that no one really is qualified for leadership properly, and to just acknowledge the ways in which you fall short of a perfect leader, and allow that recognition that you're not perfect but that you're trying your best is maybe another way to approach a position like that with humility. But yeah, it's hard when leadership is so much connected to all those egoistical qualities in modern times. But I guess foundationally we just need to understand that leadership is entirely separable from those qualities of pride and arrogance, and it need not be entailed in a position of leadership. Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Nice question. Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Perhaps there's hardly any government in this world who's actually following the principles sages were advising Vina these days. In spite of such costly scenario, there are still some nations thriving materially, having favorable weather, nature, etc. How do you understand this paradox?
Yeah, well, I mean, the leadership is, the degradation of the leadership is reflective of how society at large has just fallen from a desire for a relationship with God and to live in accordance with religious principles, and that affects every facet of society, from the ground all the way up to the high levels of leadership. And it is disheartening, certainly, to see the sort of leaders that we've chosen to elect. The purport of this verse actually mentions that in Vedic times it was slightly less democratic, in the sense that not everyone voted, but just those who were very instilled with religiosity and understanding the right to vote. But we see, as there are lots of positive things about democracy and giving everyone a right to vote, but what it also means is that anyone, regardless of regardless of their understanding, has the opportunity to vote. And so that has seen people rise to power who really don't have the qualities of a leader, but they are popular amongst the people such that they have rose to their position. So Prabhupada made a little critique of the sort of democracy that we live in today, and just made a comparison to Vedic times, where it was a slightly different system of electing officials and electing leaders. Does that answer your question? Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Beautiful. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki.